One of the most controversial topics right now in the smartphone world has to be pricing. Everybody is getting roasted for their pricing. Prices are increasing, and I have a little bit of an unpopular opinion. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So before I do anything else, let me start off with a major disclaimer. I hope a lot of you are at least watching up till here, but I know that a lot of people are just gonna go right to the comments after looking at the title and start ranting there. But here is a disclaimer. I don't think all smartphones should be $1,000. And I absolutely don't think every $1,000 smartphone is good. That's just not the case. That's not the argument I'm trying to make. I'm trying to make a very different argument. And if you watch the video in its entirety, you'll know exactly the point I'm trying to make. So let me start by setting the tone here. This is 2017. Apple came out with their new iPhone 10. This is a big step for Apple. They're finally redesigning the phone. They've had the same basic look for so many years, and finally they're changing things up. They're getting rid of the home button and massive changes are coming. But this comes at a hefty price. The iPhone 10 comes out at $1,000. So it has a $999 price tag, which is absolutely unprecedented. Just to give you guys a comparison point, the iPhone 7, the phone before this, was $649, and even the more expensive 7 Plus started at $769. So this is a big jump in price. The biggest jump it's ever been on any iPhone. So this was a shock to the system, and even I wasn't a fan of it, and Apple absolutely got they got crucified. People who were making jokes about it, the jokes didn't stop coming for years. So they were the butt of all jokes, and people just didn't get the $1,000 smartphone. And I think that now that time has gone by, people have become a lot more welcoming to it. So let me tell you guys a little bit more about this $1,000 smartphone trend. So when the first $1,000 smartphone came out, people never thought that this would happen to their favorite brands, but of course, everybody in the market has moved up and creeped up their prices to that sweet $1,000 mark. And it's crazy now because when you think about it, back in 2017 when the iPhone 10 came out, the equivalent OnePlus phone. So OnePlus has always been considered kind of a mid-ranger in terms of price, but a flagship in terms of specs. So the most expensive OnePlus phone you could get, of course, before tax was $550, and that was the OnePlus 5T. Now, $550 is a big jump from the $1,000 that Apple was asking, and people definitely use that as a comparison point. However, in 2020, a short 3 years later, the newest OnePlus flagship maxes out at $1,000. So the same Apple flagship still starts at $999, but the OnePlus now maxes out at $999. Now, of course, I know Apple, they introduced a new Pro Max model. There's higher storage, so you're not really paying $1,000 all in. You're probably paying $1,300, $1,400, but that's still a very small gap compared to what it was back in the day. So OnePlus is, all these phones are starting to become $1,000, and that's a very interesting play here. And that brings up an important question. In today's marketplace, with so many options, so many phones through all price brackets, does a $1,000 smartphone make any sense? And, I wish this answer was as simple as yes or no, and I could just, tell you that and get this video done with and go about my day. But no, the answer is a bit more nuanced, and it very much so depends on the user, on you guys, what you're buying the phone for, what the intent is, what the purpose is. There's a lot of considerations that go into here. So it's not black or white. It's a gray, very multiple shades of gray kind of situation here. And I think that the most important thing that people forget is that a smartphone has replaced so many things in your life. So that's an important thing to remember as I move on. So think about this. How many hours a day do you use your smartphone? Now, I know this answer is gonna be different for everybody, but for me personally, on an average day, I use my smartphone 6 to 8 hours a day. Now, this is just screen on time. This is not background, the music I use or the maps there's a lot of things that go into this, but on an average day, I use my phone 6 to 8 hours. So that's basically a third of my day I'm on this one single device. So that's more than any other single object I use in a day. It's insane. That's, when you think about it, just tell me, sit there and think, for a majority of you guys, what is that one object you use the most throughout the day? I highly doubt many other people will say anything besides a smartphone. Maybe a computer if you work in something that requires a computer a lot, but even then, I think a lot of your responsibilities and duties can be carried out with a smartphone, which I think a lot of people do. So, when you think about it, it's hard to ascertain how long everybody uses their phone. Personally, I use my phone about a year, even less in most cases, but I am not the more average user, as you try to say. I was looking into this, doing a lot of research, and while there's not a very clear answer, there has been an independent study conducted by a firm known as Kantar World Panel. And what they found was interesting. They found that two things. First, that smartphone users are actually pushing their smartphone purchases ahead, so they're not buying them as often as they used to. So people are holding on to their smartphones longer. And two, that an average user uses their phone for about 2 years before they replace them, around 24 months. That's a very important thing to remember here. So if you think about it in terms of longevity, a phone that you buy for $1,000, you'll end up using for 2 years on average. So that's about $42 a month. And that's not even accounting for if you decide to trade it in or sell it, or what value you get after that 24 months. But let's just assume that that doesn't even apply. $42 a month. That's something that you have to think about a little bit more, because $42 a month, when you think about it on its own, it's not that ridiculous of an amount for a device that gives you so much. I use my phone as a mobile device. I use it to communicate with people. I use it to navigate around the world. I use it as a GPS system. I use it as a camera. That is my main camera. I use it to take notes. I use it as a device to access internet. There's so many uses of a smartphone that, for me, it absolutely makes sense to spend that $42 a month. Now, of course, there's a lot of arguments as to not take things like this into consideration when you break it down month by month, but I think that when you think about it, that's not a big price difference. Now, another important thing is, when you buy these expensive smartphones, think of all the things you've replaced. I no longer have a dedicated GPS system. That used to cost me a lot. I used to pay for map updates. It was a whole thing. No longer do you have to pay for that. I used to have a dedicated camera. I really don't have that anymore. I use my smartphone everywhere I go. Communication device, that's all wrapped into one. I don't have an iPod anymore. All my music is played from my phone. So there's so many devices that have wrapped into one. So if you would have broken down the cost of all these devices a couple of years ago and added them up, I'm pretty sure you'd end up somewhere in the same ballpark. Now, I know the argument here you're going to have is you can do the same things on a mid or entry-level smartphone. All the same apps are available, all the same things can be done. But let me tell you a few things that the more expensive price gets you. And one of the biggest things is hardware. You get some excellent hardware, very premium. There's just something else about the fit and finish of a premium flagship $1,000 phone. Just pick up an iPhone and tell me if you guys don't think that's a premium phone. The stainless steel, the back, the frosted glass, everything just feels absolutely excellent. And the same can be said for almost every other $1,000 flagship. They just have this feeling that a lot of mid-range and entry-level phones don't. Now, that alone doesn't justify the price, but what else justifies the price for me is the quality of hardware. So you get the absolute cutting edge of processor technology, which means that the phone won't slow down. It'll handle every task you can throw at it. And for the most part, there's never going to be a moment where the processor is a bottleneck for your usage and your usability. And the biggest thing also is camera. So I have been using my smartphone camera as my main camera for ages. Even though I have this dedicated camera that I'm filming on, I never take that on any trip I go to. This is just purely for YouTube. I never use this because using a smartphone camera is so much more convenient. You can carry it on in your pocket. You don't need to carry lenses. You don't need to carry separate batteries. Everything can be done on that one device. Not only does that improve your usability of it, it's more portable, it's just excellent. And you have so many things you can quickly alternate through with a smartphone. Not to mention the benefits of cloud storage and sharing, so you don't have to do data dumps. There's just so many benefits. That's a whole other video on its own, but it's just a big benefit for me. So having an excellent camera on my phone is really important, and that price to me is worth it. And another major point that I want to make here is that smartphones are expensive, yes, but there's a benefit here. So since most people trade out their smartphones every 2 years, if you buy a flagship, so the biggest example I can give here is I've done some data, I'll throw up some screenshots. So I went on to Swappa and I looked at an iPhone 10. That came out in 2017. I looked at the prices that they go for when they're used, and they go for about $424. That was the average sale price of an iPhone 10 64 gig right now. So that's $424. So that's a $999 phone. So the $1,000 phone 3 years later selling for $424. That's about 42% of its value. Now, what I did was I also went back to 2017 and tried to find one of the most popular entry-level phones. Now, what I did, there was a lot of considerations here, but I ended up taking the G5 Plus because that was one of the most globally available phones, and I think that was a good comparison point to set. So the G5 Plus, it ended up being a $290 phone if you bought it new. I'm sorry, $280 phone if you bought it new. And now on the used market, they sell for $56. Now, both of these phones came out in the same year, so you would have probably ended up buying them somewhere within a few months of each other if you were in the market. So from a $280 phone to a $56 phone. So in percentage, that's only about 20% of its original value. So when you look at the numbers, after 3 years, you still hold 40+% of your value on the iPhone, a premium flagship phone, whereas you hold way less on a budget entry-level phone. And the reason here is because people still are interested in buying flagship phones even after they're older. The market and demand for them is strong. I have seen this myself. I've sold year or two old flagships and they sell instantly. Trying to sell budget phones is a big pain because honestly the demand isn't there, and it's just nobody really wants to buy a 2 or 3 year old entry-level phone. By that point, those phones are usually out of updates, they're very slow and can't keep up with these new apps, and it's just not a great experience. So people don't go to those phones, they just try to buy these older flagships. So you have a higher demand. So if, say, you bought the flagship phone, you'd kind of make up some of that money on the back end when you try to sell it. So that's a big advantage that I think a lot of people forget to consider when purchasing these expensive devices. Now, with all this in mind, I personally do not think it's a bad thing that there are $1,000 smartphones out there. It's great, I love to use them, but that being said, not every $1,000 smartphone is great. Not every $1,000 smartphone is worth it, and there are some phones that just don't hold their value. So the biggest example I can give you is the Galaxy S20 Ultra. So that phone came out in February. That's only 3 months ago. That phone has a price. It is still selling for $1,400 on Samsung's website. Now that phone you can pick up used in good to great condition on Swappa for $900 to $1,000. That's a near 30% loss in 3 or 4 months. Incredible. Just think about this. You've lost 30% in the matter of 3 or 4 months. Insanity. And there are some smartphones, particularly I've noticed Samsung flagships, that don't hold their value. So maybe that doesn't apply. But what it does entail is that if you're looking for a flagship, maybe some used deals could also be applied. So I think that $1,000 flagship phones are worth it depending on your usage. So for me, it's a big part of my usage. I use it as my main camera on vacations. I use it all day and every day to listen to music, to navigate me when I'm driving. There's just so many uses for it. I love my flagship and I am happy to pay that $1,000. I don't think it's a waste of money. However, I absolutely understand why some people do think it's a waste of money. So that being said, I want to know your thoughts on flagship smartphones. Do you guys have a flagship smartphone, or do you guys use a mid or entry-level phone? There's no shame in what phone you use. Honestly, I don't get why people get so built up and pent up over these. It's not a big deal, but I do want to know why you chose what you chose, and if you do buy these entry or mid-level phones, do you guys resell them? Do you have trouble reselling them? Do you guys keep them? What's the story here? I definitely want to learn more about that. So I would really appreciate it if you could let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to see a little bit of a discussion going on over there. So that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Check out my social media pages right here if you haven't already. Follow me there to get some behind the scenes sneak peeks and stuff of things I'm doing. Other than that, really, guys, I've just been gone for a little bit, so it's nice to be back. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.